Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic. It is EDH Commander Thursday, and in today's video we are going to continue to build around the Lazav Dimir Mastermind in the channel's first EDH mill deck. Hello, welcome back MTG BC. That is the MTG Burgeoning community. Here we are with another installment as we continue to build around your selection of Lazav Dimir Mastermind. For anyone who missed any of the previous episodes of this deck building series, you can click on the links in the description below and it'll bring you right up to speed. Thus far, here are the first 24 cards added to this Dimir mill build. The first 12 are spells that will mill all of our opponents, whereas the second 12 will mill target opponent. So far, we have included Altar of the Brood, Ruin Crab, Maddening Cacophony, Folio of Fancies, Manic Scribe, Mind Crank, King Narfi's Betrayal, Psychic Corrosion, Memory Erosion, Court of Cunning, Consuming Aberration, Mind Grind, Altar of Dementia, Thief of Sanity, Sphinx's Tutelage, Teferi's Tutelage, Mind Funeral, Fraying Sanity, Startled Awake, which on the backside is Persistent Nightmare. Gotta love that card from Shadows over Innistrad. Nemesis of Reason, Mirko Vosk, Mind Drinker, Enter the God Eternals, Traumatize, Geth, Lord of the Vault. Those are the first 24 cards, all milling one way or another. So in our installment today, the next 12 cards that we are going to include are going to be cards that are focused on graveyards, particularly the oh-so-wonderful resources that will be just piling up in our opponent's graveyards. They're going to be thick. We're hoping that we can get those graveyards to tower over their libraries before the game is over. So let's take advantage of the cards that they've put into their graveyard, by our means most likely, and let's roll out 12 spells that have an effect on our opponent's graveyards. The first one is going to be Reanimate. For a single black mana and the cost of the creature's mana value, we can put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So we could technically get one of our creatures out of our graveyard if we needed. Chances are, because we're blue-black, we might be focusing more on the creatures that might, have green and or red in them. Reanimate is our first graveyard-specific spell in this dozen cards. Next up, we are going to include a copy of Bloodchief Ascension. Black enchantment for 1 black that reads at the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, we may put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has at least 3 quest counters on it, we may have that player lose 2 life, and if we do, we gain 2 life. I love that this is an enchantment, which will give it an extra layer of difficulty in removing, because not everyone packs in a ton of enchantment removal. We can consider Bloodchief Ascension to be a win condition in our deck, particularly if we can get at least 3 quest counters on it, which, for only the cost of 2 life per turn, should not be difficult to do. Bloodchief Ascension is the second graveyard-specific card in this video. Next up, we are going to include the Nighthawk Scavenger. 1 and 2 black. It is a vampire rogue with a power of 1+* and a static toughness of 3. It has flying, it has death touch, and it has lifelink. Nighthawk Scavenger's power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in our opponent's graveyards. As the graveyards are going to be quite high, we can consider Nighthawk Scavenger to have a ridiculously high 6, 7 power for just 1 and 2 black with flying, death touch, and lifelink. With enough swings from a huge Nighthawk Scavenger, we could look to this creature to be a closer in our mill deck. Speaking of closers in our mill deck, the next card, Guilt Feeder, is a horror, 3 and 2 black for 0/4 with fear. And of course, fear means that this creature can only be blocked by black or artifact creatures. And whenever Guilt Feeder attacks and isn't blocked, defending player loses 1 life for each card in their graveyard. So we don't even need the Guilt Feeder to deal damage. We just have to make sure it's not blocked. Hence it having fear. So as long as our opponents have no artifact creatures and have no black creatures, if we tip Guilt Feeder sideways and send it on the attack, boy, oh boy, if it isn't blocked, some opponent most likely is losing the game. We can turn to Guilt Feeder as another one of the win conditions in this deck. And of course, it's a graveyard-specific card. Next up, we are going to play with 1 copy of Extract from Darkness. 3 blue and a black for a sorcery. This one reads, each player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. So this affects us a little bit by us having to mill 2 cards. Then we can put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So we get to trigger some mill spells, and we get to pick the best creature in any graveyard that's on the table at that moment. Extract from Darkness is going to be a good card. All right, next up we are going to include Chainer, Dementia Master. 3 and 2 black for a 3/3 minion legend. It is a Nightmare Lord, giving all nightmares +1/+1. We can tap 3 black, pay 3 life, and put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. That creature is black and becomes a nightmare in addition to its other types. If Chainer Dementia Master leaves play, exile all nightmares from the game. So this helps us to borrow our opponent's creatures, perhaps one of ours. And if for some reason Chainer leaves the play, maybe it's from exile or a bounce spell or a destruction spell, then any of the quote-unquote creatures he borrowed from our opponent's libraries, or from not our opponent's libraries, from our opponent's graveyards, or from our graveyard, those creatures will get exiled. But still, for 3 life and 3 black, we're going to have to pick any creature we can. And notice that it does not say only as a sorcery. We can do that at the end of turn, get the biggest, baddest creature we can find, and then attack during our next turn. Wonderful card, Chainer. All right, next spell we are going to include, or I should say creature, even though creatures are spells. Oh, we got to put in Sir Conrad the Grim. 3 and 2 black for a 5/4 human knight. Whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves the graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent. And even better, it has a built-in mill ability. 1 and a black, each player puts the top card of their library into their graveyard. Although we too are affected by this milling, however, if we put any creature cards as a result of that milling into our graveyard, each opponent is taking 1 damage. Sir Conrad the Grim is definitely going to be one of the win conditions in this mill deck. All right, we got 5 more to go, folks, in our graveyard-specific spells. And this one from Commander Legends, Rakshasa Debaser. 4 and 2 black for a 6/6 cat demon. Whenever Rakshasa Debaser attacks, we put target creature card from defending player's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. This also has the Encore mechanic, and for 6 and 2 black, we can exile this cat demon from our graveyard, and for each opponent, we create a token copy of Rakshasa that attacks that opponent this turn if able. They do gain haste, and then we have to sacrifice them at the beginning of the end step. This is an ability we can only do as a sorcery. However, when it does attack, we do get to take a creature from each opponent's graveyard because the Encore mechanic will have a copy of each one of these creatures for each one of our opponents. So that's why Rakshasa is going to be included, because we can get a lot of creatures onto the battlefield under our control whether it's from our graveyard or right onto the battlefield. All right, next up we are going to include Rexiel, the Risen Deep. 3, 2 blue and a black. It's a 5/8 legendary Kraken with Island Walk and Swamp Walk. So it has two of what most likely are two of the most three popular colors in EDH. And we can just walk right on past because everyone's playing islands and everyone's playing swamps. And whenever Rexiel, the Risen Deep, deals combat damage to a player, we may cast an instant or sorcery card from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card will be put into a graveyard this turn, instead it gets exiled. So this doesn't have anything to do with the creature cards like we've seen so many times in the previous spells in this particular video. This one is going to help ourselves to free instant and sorcery spells. Rexiel, the Risen Deep, get ready to cast some Cultivates, baby. All right, next we have, on theme with instant and sorcery spells, we're going to play with a copy of Diluvian Primordial. 5 and 2 blue, this 5/5 flying avatar says when it ETBs for each opponent, we may cast up to one target instant or sorcery card from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. If a card cast this way would be put into the graveyard, it gets exiled instead. So similar to what Rexiel does, it's not a combat trigger. This is just an ETB trigger. So we can have Diluvian Primordial come down, and for each opponent, we get to sift through their graveyard, look at their best instant and or sorcery spell, and then cast it for free. Diluvian Primordial doing some work. And as long as we got one of the primordials, we might as well play with the other one when we have Sepulchral Primordial, 5 and 2 black for a 5/4 avatar with Intimidate. Intimidate is a form of fear. This one will be Sepulchral Primordial can only be blocked by creatures that share a color type with it, so it can only be black. It can only be blocked by black creatures. When Sepulchral Primordial ETBs for each opponent, we may put up to one target creature card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. So similar to the Primordial that we just saw, the Diluvian Primordial, the Sepulchral will get us some creatures from graveyards. Beautiful. Put 3 different opponents on to the Magic table. We'll cast Sepulchral Primordial in our mill deck, and let's get some monsters on our side of the battlefield. That card could be considered a win condition. Speaking of win conditions for a deck that wants to put as many cards of our opponent's libraries into the graveyard, the conversation begins and ends with Rise of the Dark Realms. 7 and 2 black. Put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under our control. This will end the game. For all the time, effort, energy, and resources we invested into filling the graveyards of our opponents, then we can tap a total of 9, make sure that we have at least 2 black, of course, and then we can put all of those wonderful creature cards from all of their graveyards and our own onto the battlefield under our control. Rise of the Dark Realms is most definitely a win condition in our Dimir mill deck. And that will do it, fans of MTG Burgeoning. We are 36 cards deep into our Lazav Dimir mill build. We're nearing the end, folks. We're probably about the halfway point. Not the halfway point, the third way point, because there's only 36 cards. Next up, we are going to take a look at some, disruption, some removal, some other miscellaneous spells before we install the land base, test this baby out, and call it a series. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.